Welcome, everyone, to Church and State, Christianity and American Politics in 2024, the newest conversation in the IOP Speaker Series. I'm Nina Iyer, a fourth year here at the college majoring in economics, specialized in data science, and I'm the interview section editor for The Gate, the IOP's political magazine, and I'm honored to be introducing you all to our panelists today. First, we have joining us Dr. Russell Moore, who is a former IOP Pritzker Fellow and the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today. Dr. Moore is an ordained Baptist minister who has served as the president of the Southern Baptist Convention's Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, and as a provost and dean of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville. He is now based out of Nashville and regularly shares the Bible's teachings with his congregation at the Emmanuel Church, but you can also always hear him on his weekly podcast, The Russell Moore Show. Next, we have current IOP Pritzker Fellow, Sister Simone Campbell, an accomplished religious leader, attorney, poet, and self-proclaimed mischief maker if you follow her on the platform formerly known as Twitter. She served as the executive director of Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice from 2004 to 2021, and has done tremendous lobbying work, including writing the famous Nuns Letter in support of healthcare reform in 2010, which was critical in aiding the passage of the Affordable Care Act. She's led 6 massive cross-country Nuns on the Bus trips to spark awareness and conversation about everything from tax reform to voter turnout. We are lucky to have Sister Campbell here on campus for the next quarter, and I encourage you all to sign up for her seminar on February 13th called Inclusive Democracy, Conversations Across Divides. Also in this conversation, we have Reverend Dr. Starsky Wilson, President and CEO of the Children's Defense Fund, a nonprofit focused on child advocacy and research that has been working to lift children out of poverty and ensure their safety. Dr. Wilson was president and CEO of the Deaconess Foundation from 2011 to 2020, a faith-based grant-making organization supporting a movement for child well-being in St. Louis through child-focused public policy. Under his leadership, Deaconess invested nearly $90 million to improve the lives of children. Finally, this discussion will be moderated by the IOP's very own executive director, Zeenat Rahman. She has previously served at the U.S. State Department as a special advisor to Secretaries Hillary Clinton and John Kerry, and as acting director at the Center for Faith-Based and Community Initiatives at USAID. She is also one of our own alumni, having received her master's in Middle East Studies from the University of Chicago, focusing her thesis on youth religious identity in the 21st century. If you enjoy this event and are excited to explore other topics in politics, please check the IOP's website for more on future Speaker Series events and other opportunities within the Institute of Politics. The events we have coming up on the docket are Who Votes in 2024, literally half the world, on February 13th from 5:30 to 6:45 p.m. at the Keller Center, and Illinois Bails on Cash Bail, Public Safety Beyond Jails, on February 19th from noon to 1 p.m. at the IOP. As we begin the event, we ask that you silence or turn off your cell phones. We will have microphone access in the audience when there is time for Q&A at the end, and as always, we will give priority for the first questions to students. Now please give a warm welcome to Dr. Moore, Sister Campbell, Reverend Dr. Wilson, and Zeenat Rahman.
All right. Thank you, Nina, and welcome to all of you. Welcome back to you, Dr. Moore, and Sister Simone, you're here this quarter with us. So Starsky, you're the outlier, and hopefully, that will, maybe at the end of the session, you'll fall in love with the Institute of Politics. As somebody who's worked at the intersection of policy, interfaith relations, religious pluralism, civic engagement, I couldn't be more thrilled to be with the three of you for this conversation, and we decided to kind of take a little topic on, which is the intersection of Christianity and politics. So I thought we'd do some table setting first, and then dive into different questions around this. And so if you could start just by briefly setting the table around what does it mean to you to be a Christian, and how does it show up in your policy and civic engagement work?
Sure.
You want to start?
Sure. Glad to start. Glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation and opportunity. As a self-identifying kind of cradle Christian, one who has been raised in the life of the church, historically Black church traditions, most significantly, and lots of kind of ecumenical engagement and denominational ambiguity in between. It means to be a Christian to me means to live out the way of Jesus, that I am following after that early movement of folks who gathered together, sharing their possessions and understanding and appreciating a sense of a glimpse of the kingdom of heaven and of God together. By being together. So those shared gifts, graces, and goods the reality of a unique experience that somehow seems elevated than what's going on in the rest of the world and empire, and the following after a model of one who walked among people who are marginalized by others is what it means to be a Christian to me.
How does it show up in your work?
Well, in the same kind of ways. It has a collectivist tendency to my work. I believe that we are the better. I look for visions of the world that have to do with some connection to that taproot. I draw connections between an aspirational land of promise in Hebrew scriptures, a preached kingdom of heaven, a basileia of God in Jesus's teaching and preaching, a hope-filled organization of community in Paul's ecclesia, or the called out, what he thought would be the organization of life after the fall of empire, and Martin King's beloved community. So those are visions that I continue to aspire to and try to cast together in a new way. And so if politics is who gets what, when, where, and why, then it has to somehow approximate a picture of people sharing their goods, sharing responsibility, has to approximate a people of everyone being cared for appropriately, and has to approximate a picture of unique socioeconomic and even racial diversity.
Yeah. Sister Simone.
That was great. Okay, I'm a Catholic sister. I joined my religious community, the Sisters of Social Service, after my freshman year in college, because I always knew that Jesus and justice went together, because they both begin with J. It's obvious. So my hunger this was like late mid-60s, and my hunger was to do justice and to do it now. And I couldn't stand being in the classroom another minute. So I joined my religious community and then immediately had 3 years of orientation to the community. So I was in a classroom. That was a little disconcerting. But what I discovered within my community is that somebody's having a little trouble there. Okay, all these pesky phones are turned off, right? Unless it's, it's fixed now, I'm sure. So what I discovered in our time of training is Catholic social teaching. Catholic social teaching is 9 principles that take that gospel reality, that sense of communal commitment, the sense of sharing in common, and develops principles that we are called to act out of, and my religious community was founded to implement. So things like the dignity of all, the sharing the goods, that we all have a claim on all of creation, the requirement to care for creation, all of these 9 principles, standing with workers, making sure workers receive just wages and just working conditions. So all of that is at the heart of who my religious community is. We were also founded in Budapest, Hungary 101 years ago, and our foundress was the first woman in the Hungarian parliament when she was the head of our community. So we have always known that faith has political consequences. Our work for those who are too often left out of the economic models really comes from our commitment to our faith. And so ironically, in my community, we take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, meaning we hold everything in common as a religious community. And we live simply because of that. Chastity, that we don't get married, but I'm called sister because the idea is we should be sister to all. And obedience, usually people think that's military obedience. What it means really is the requirement in prayer and meditation to listen for the movement of the Spirit, for the creative moment to respond, and then respond with courage. Just do it because it's Spirit-driven. So, in 25 words or less, that's sort of
Not bad.
my story.
Dr. Moore.
Well, I'm an evangelical Christian, which has become a very politicized and ambiguous word.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, when I was an IOP fellow here, I had a friend of mine, Tim Keller, who was recently died, was a pastor in New York, who came with me. And one of the students said, the word evangelical has become such a politicized word. Why don't you just get rid of it? And Tim said, well, because most of us are in Africa and Asia and Latin America, and the North Americans don't get to choose what we're called just because we've messed up the brand. Ooh. And the student said, fair enough, and sat down, and I thought, yes, that is fair enough. But one of the unusual things right now, because of the politicization and because of some of the more hucksterish and buffoonish actions that we have seen come under the name of evangelical Christianity, many of the people who are the most committed to the theology of evangelical Christianity are sometimes the least eager to use the word for themselves. What I mean by that when I say I'm an evangelical Christian is that I believe the historic creeds of the church. I believe that Jesus is the Son of God and was raised from the dead. And I'm part of that revival movement within the broader church that emphasizes the personal, that people do not come before God nation by nation or party by party, but person by person, and that conversion actually does happen, which means, despite all appearances in American life right now, persuasion can happen. And the person who is the most hostile to you right now might, in fact, be the person that you depend upon in the next generation. And my faith reminds me of that. But I think probably the most important thing is to have a sense of a sobriety and a gravity to the stakes of politics, but without a panicky obsession with politics. And I think one of the things that we've seen in recent years is that there has been a kind of catastrophism in which political identity becomes, if those people, whoever they are, get control, everything is lost. And I believe that's a distorted view of what it means to be human, and it's an impossible view for somebody who really believes in the kingdom of God.
But why has that been so effective? That kind of scarcity mindset, particularly amongst evangelicals, mainstream majority Christians.
Well, I think one of the reasons is because appealing to the limbic system works.
Yeah, fear, stoking fear, anxiety.
Yeah. And I think also because there are legitimate concerns in evangelical communities about secularization, some of the misunderstandings of religious people that come along with secularization. That can be easily exploited into catastrophism because having the viewpoint, here are some genuine problems we have, but here are some ways in which that's not an existential threat, may well be true. It doesn't raise a lot of money. It doesn't mobilize people. What mobilizes people is you are at the final forefront here of everything going away. And that is a very compelling message, and there are people who have used it very effectively.
Yeah, I think there's also a tie here, and I'm going to slightly disagree. I think we in Christianity have gotten used to, and we have used scarcity, catastrophism as a way, I didn't know that was a word, thank you, I'm taking that, as a way of compelling and pushing behavior.
Yeah.
And so there's a tie between telling people that if you don't do this, there is eternal damnation for your soul on the other side, to saying if you don't vote this way, then there is the damnation of the country on the other side. Right. And so I think part of what we've got to own is the ways in which we have used deficit, negative, fear-mongering framing in the context of Christianity, that it is translated in many ways to our politic. And we've done so when we've had so much better assets to engage, right? We have the language of joy and flourishing. It's another J. I believe Jesus, justice, and joy go together.
Amen.
We do have eschatological hopes. We can talk about renewal and flourishing and thriving of human life and new visions on the other side, and we've not done that. Hopefully, though, the scholarship tells us that this asset-based expansive framing is motivating. We've just not deployed it in our politic, and maybe we can deploy it a little better also in the life of our church.
I was going to say, like, has asset-based framing ever gone with politics? I mean, is it that religion is becoming politicized as we become more tribalized? Go ahead,
I think there's a real concern. I had never heard the evangelical piece spoken so clearly as an individual judgment, and that individualism then comes as a piece of judgment, because my faith is all about community. And that Jesus always sent the apostles out 2 by 2 because he knew they'd screw out by themselves. So the challenge, I think, is in the political realm. If you think of individualism, it's easy to get scared. But if we're in this together, if we have something that we can work on, we might be nervous, but at least we don't get so that catastrophe is not present because the community will see us through.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a real tension, is in faith, it's between individual and communal.
And it gets to the heart of, what you said, faith has political consequences. What are the limits of what faith comes into the public square? And that's the question I have for you all. Like, how do you think about the limits of that? Because that is the intersection of that I think is maybe problematic when Christianity becomes too political. But how do you define those two things? I mean,
Well, in talking about individualism, I think actually the problem that we have right now, there's a genuine problem with individualism. The problem we have right now is actually the reverse of that. There's a kind of collectivism in which people find their ultimate identities nationally, or in terms of partisan groups and mobs and hives, that distorts what it means to be a person. And so what ends up happening is an outsourcing of the conscience to whatever the group identity is. And I think that when Christianity is functioning at its best in a political system, one of the things that we remember is that group identity in terms of nationalistic fervor is always a present temptation. And we realize how easy it is to get swept into that. Mm-hmm. So instead of that, having an understanding of, I live in a pluralistic society where we don't impose our beliefs upon other people, because in the things that matter the most, if one actually does believe in a future judgment, coerced faith and conformity is of no good at all. That's not faith at all. So you have a conscience then that's informed by the things that you believe to be true. You seek to persuade your fellow citizens of those things, but you don't seek to steamroll over them.
Dr. Wilson,
Yeah, I think part of the nuance to that is that we do have remarkable cultural identities that show up in the instantiation of faith, no matter how that faith expresses itself. And so as a Black Christian connecting globally, I also hear Ubuntu theology coming through. I hear John Mabiti saying, I am not just individual or collectivist, but I am because we are. And because we are, I am. There is a mutuality to that, and I find myself in the context of community in many ways that in the evangelical context, I find my personal purpose, I find my sense of call because of needs in the life of community. So I think the two go together. I also don't want to leave, Zeenat, your question here about whether asset-based framing ever worked in the context of politics, sitting in the city of Chicago where a dude got elected president talking about hope. That is a deeply theological concept. And so I think there are ways in which asset-based framing, this sense of possibility, does work. It requires compelling messengers. It requires a deep commitment to the disciplines of such a message. And I don't know that we've seen that kind of discipline, or we've seen people conjure and try to stir our higher angels as much as we really should.
You know, as you were saying that, Starsky, I was just thinking, well, why haven't we? And one of the things that I realized is such a treasure about being a member of a religious community is the discipline of prayer, where it acknowledges, it's not rote words, it's a meditation. It's opening your heart to a divine spirit. That's what I believe. But anyway, that's our community's approach. But if you open yourself to the surprise, to the possibility, to something new, and not so define the march of what salvation is and how we do it, that opening ourselves up to the surprise of how is the divine alive in community? How is the divine alive among us? Where are we being called to include those who are too often left out? And that kind of imaginative stretch is probably the most exciting bit of lightning I know. It is galvanizing. And that hope then makes a difference, because it's us. It's not just me against the wilderness.
That's well said. I think kind of drawing us back to 2024, and if we were looking at the presidential election tomorrow, it would probably be a Trump-Biden rematch. And I'm wondering, how do you think the land has changed from 2020 to 2024 vis-a-vis the communities that you participate in and are a part of? What is different this time as you're looking at the next 6 months or so?
Yeah.
Dr. Wilson.
Well, I like how you start the hard ones right here, but I'm just saying generally. A couple of things that give me hope in the context of this moment. We were talking before about, there was a mention of Christianity in the context of politics. I choose to I'll expand the frame a little bit and think about politics or government operating in the context of faith. That I think there's a sense of a need to serve a wider vision. And I get excited because, for better or worse, for people's politics, I see an animation of young people, and I see that in a hopeful way. I connect this whole thing, frankly. I look in the Hebrew scriptures and I see in Isaiah a call that the peaceable community is tied to the vision of a toddler doing remarkable things that people have never seen before. And I hear in the New Testament Jesus saying, "Suffer the little children to come unto me and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of heaven," and tying his long-term vision to the reality of children. So I say all of that to say, I see an animation of young people that is disrupting what put people's presidential ambitions on both sides, because they're not able to presume or put them into pockets in ways that they have been able to before. They are throwing off the firm, solid base of Democrats because they have globalized commitments to peace that are expressing themselves in a way that are dropping the poll numbers of the sitting president. And they have challenges around what they see as an exploitation of both faith and a political system that marginalizes people, that causes them not to be able to be counted on by a former president. And so because young people, I believe, were sent here to turn the world upside down, I have great hope in the fact that they are disrupting and disappointing what both of these candidates want, and it will cause both of them to have to turn to them, ask deeper questions, and shift their positions in the end.
Do you think that will happen by November?
I do
you think it will force the party?
I think it will definitely force parties to come up with different approaches and solutions. I think, frankly, you're already seeing it on the call. I'll just begin to evoke the language. You're already seeing it on the calls to ceasefire, changing and finding parsing of language between the president and Netanyahu, president and his solidarity with Israel. I think you'll begin to see it in other ways if indeed Trump is the Republican candidate.
Can I ask you to refer maybe 2 more minutes? So the murder of George Floyd kind of happened in April in the presidential year, and you've been really, at the heart of so much of the activity that happened in St. Louis. And how are you seeing that overlaid on this kind of election cycle? But we had this profound moment of recognition of, what we do in this country, with regard to race relations, and a lot of efforts then you had this cycle of efforts from private sector, others to engage it, and now it feels, where we kind of turn to, if it's a bell, we're on the bottom side of that. How does that also inform then what's going to happen this year in your mind?
Yeah, I think you referenced the Ferguson uprising. That was 10 years ago this year, 10 years ago this summer, prior to the George Floyd uprising. I think two things. We have begun to see what King talked about, and talking about where do we go from here, Chaos of Community, in his last book. We see Black progress and white backlash. And what we see is expressions of anti-DEI work happening institutionally and seeing it politically, seeing a tamping down, an anti-woke, anti-DEI. We're seeing people seek to pull back, and frankly, we saw it in the context of the Ferguson uprising, a growth and a retrenchment from more creative approaches to public safety in the St. Louis region. We're seeing that now politically as well. So it'll cause animation, frankly, on both sides. It stirs up folks who are more conservative and folks who are more progressive. Timing has to do with whether it will wash itself out.
The other movement that I do take some hope in is the movement to try to talk across difference. Because what I hear, and some of it's here at the university, but it's happening in a lot of places, people are trying to find ways so that we move out of our polarized sides to talk about the human condition that we all care about and find ways forward. Come to my seminar next week. It'll be lovely. It's on this topic.
February 13th.
Nice plug.
But the critical piece is that capacity to break out of silos and the strictures of the given political word. What's political loyalty? And we have got to find ways to talk to each other. So last summer, I'll just use this one example. Last summer, I've been trying to talk to conservatives. I'm not a conservative, so I've been trying to talk to them. People would say, oh, we'll talk to you, but we couldn't talk to anybody else. So I had to go look for them. So I went to the South. I drove through the South last summer and did events at bookstores to invite people in to teach me about their lived experience, because I'm ignorant. And what I realized in the United States, it's extremely difficult for grown-ups to express ignorance, to say, I don't know. Could you teach me? Talk to me about your life. It was so fabulously educational, learning about what does it mean to live in a southern town, in a southern state, and to learn the reality of the struggles. And it's brought me, since I've been here at the university, to think, too often, I think students think they got to get it right, but really the thing is to open your mind to curiosity. And if we get young people curious, then we'll have the explosion of something new.
Dr. Moore, just going back to kind of how has the terrain changed in the last 4 years with respect to the communities, that you're a part of and, had this very public schism with, and, and do you see efforts around talking across difference increasing?
Yes, but I think one of the problems we're facing right now is that there are many people who assume that because we have the same cast of characters, that 2024 is a replay of what we went through in 2020 or in 2016. And I don't think it is.
There was no January 6th in 20, right? I mean, January 6th happened.
Yes. Not only that, but if you think about the sort of trauma that came out of 2016, wherever someone stood on Donald Trump, I don't know of a single family that doesn't have division or tension over Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I don't know a single friendship group that doesn't have some sort of broken relationship. I don't know a single congregation that isn't either divided or fearful of being divided over these questions. And part of what was especially disruptive in 2016 is that there was a sense of betrayal. Those people who would look at me not supporting Donald Trump would say, how can you not support this person who's going to do all of these things that we want done? And those of us who did not support Donald Trump to be able to say, were you just lying when you said that moral character mattered? And so forth and so on. There was that sense of, I don't know who you are anymore.
Right.
We're kind of at the opposite extreme right now, where things have become so normalized that we're completely numb to it. Just a matter of months ago, a jury found a former president of the United States liable for sexual assault, which the judge said was rape. That was not even in the top 10 stories of the day. Something that would have been as shocking as, or more shocking than Watergate or Vietnam or any of the other national traumas we've had. Gerald Ford said after Richard Nixon's resignation, our long national nightmare is over. We're in a situation now where we have a long national sleepwalking. And we simply have normalized all kinds of behavior, and that means we don't actually know what 2024 holds. If you had asked me on New Year's Day of 2020, what will 2020 look like? I would have gone through and talked about the Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden race. I would have talked about a Donald Trump race. What I wouldn't have seen is a global pandemic that brought the entire world to its knees. I would not have seen the murder of George Floyd. I would not have seen January 6th. And I would not have seen how quickly we can forget about all of those things and move on.
Well,
so we're not sure what is exactly waiting for us.
Can you speak to this piece of evangelical support and how that has changed? I mean, the reasons, right, that evangelicals may have voted for Donald Trump in 2020, I think are maybe different in 24, but what do you think?
Well, yes. I mean, I think there are a couple things that are different. I mean, one thing is in 2016 especially, there were a lot of people who would say, well, I'm not enthusiastic about Trump, but I'm voting for the lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
There was even the Atlanta Journal-Constitution had a man who's an evangelical pastor on the front page voting, literally holding his nose and turning and looking at the camera. What I worried about in 2016, and I think has proven to be the case, is that American society doesn't allow for the kind of person who would say, I agree with my party on these things, I disagree with my party on these things. So a lot of those people who would have said in 2016, I don't really like this, but I'm going to go with it, are now completely enculturated into that movement and are very much enthusiastic about it. That's one of the reasons why you don't see, if you think about 2016 especially, you saw some key evangelical figures, Robert Jeffress, Jerry Falwell Jr., others, who were coming out to support Trump, and this was newsworthy. In 2024, that's largely not the case. You look at the Iowa caucuses, Bob Vander Plaats, very respected evangelical leader in Iowa, supported Ron DeSantis, and many people were saying this is kind of a test on the ground in Iowa as to whether evangelical leadership in a political context matters at all right now. It did not. And I think that actually is a signal for the broader picture as well.
Wow.
Sister Simone, you, the nuns on the bus, every presidential year, you hit the road, right? And I'm wondering, like, what are the policy platforms or issues you're thinking about for this year?
Well, I think we did it every election cycle. So we did 7 of them. 2020, because of COVID, we did a virtual nuns on the bus, which was mildly amusing, but we did the same things. But the key issues, I really think, go back to this capacity to hold our communal sense as a nation, to find a way to talk across diversity, but to hold our principles of caring for those who are left out. And that requires then an open-hearted approach that does not show up in public squares right now. I mean, just witness what happened this past week in Congress. It was a mess, but there wasn't an ounce of compassion for the people that had worked so hard on this bill that totally got scuttled because of political desires without referencing the needs of our nation. So I think what we're looking at is trying to rebuild that capacity to talk across difference, but reverence the needs of our nation. And that's what we've got to put first, is our national concern, because it goes to places like Gaza. It goes to places like our leadership in the world, but it goes mostly to how we care for those here, the homeless, the family that stands outside a Target up on 53rd, trying to beg enough money to survive. I mean, we've got to find, we're the richest nation on earth, we can do something about this. That's what we have to deal with. Outside of that, we've got it covered.
Yeah, right. Dr. Wilson, you said we have to be engaged in politics because it's the who, what, when, why of who gets the resources.
Yeah.
And so then how does that impact kind of the policy and the advocacy work? What is that work for Children's Defense Fund?
Yeah, so Children's Defense Fund, founded 50 years ago by Marion Wright Edelman, really kind of has all three key elements of social change under one roof. So direct service through programs, through freedom schools, where we're helping literacy and leadership development in 30 states and 120 cities across the country for young people, largely African-American young people. Policy change, so where we're pursuing an agenda that has to do with expanding access to really what we talk about as the American dream, right? If you work hard, defer gratification, get an education, can you do better than your parents? Well, if you're a millennial or Gen Z, no. That used to be true. It's actually not true anymore. So restoring social mobility, making sure that the things that we have proven in the context of a pandemic, we can live out when everyone's lives are not on the line. Number one, that, hey, in public school, everything shouldn't be free except the food. Universal free school meals actually save schools money, make sure young people have the nourishment they need, and we've proven that it can be done if we can conjure the public will. We know that communities need to be safe, and in a country where the number one cause of death for children is indeed violence and guns, then we have to make a choice between our children or our guns. It is actually that simple. And so gun control and keeping those in care is one of the challenges that we put in front of people in our policy agenda. But also we work in power building. Because of our belief in young people and their voices to see a different future, we're organizing among college students across the country, investing in leadership development, helping them to understand community organizing and public policy related to children and young people, and putting their voices to work to make sure that democracy is better tomorrow than it is today. So we do all of those things together, but from a policy perspective, we're really pursuing just and caring communities, family stability and economic mobility, children's health and healing, education for civic life and work, and investing deeply in early learning and development, because we know what happens early lasts a lifetime. Yeah. So that's what we're pursuing from a policy perspective.
So let's stay on the issue of young people for a little bit, because you know, I think as all of three of you are faith leaders, you must be worried about, you know, the lack of participation in religious life for Generation Z, but really millennials as well. Do you see that play out in your churches, where you're seeing less young people involved? And what does that kind of portend for the future for civic participation, much of which has come out of, you know, religious life in this country? Dr. Moore?
Well, one of the things that we have seen is that there is a response from younger people in congregations in which there's always the tendency to overreact to the last bad thing and to say, because we have seen how this has turned out, the answer must be the complete opposite. So there are many evangelical young people who look at the politicization and the means to an end weaponization of theology and religion in order to say, well, the answer is complete political disengagement altogether. And so I will often find myself in a situation where I'm giving a talk to a group of older evangelicals and then to a group of younger evangelicals, and I'm saying what seem to be completely contradictory things, which is, with the older group, politics is not a religion. The kingdom of God does not come in through political activism. And with younger people, I'm saying you have responsibilities as citizens, as part of a democratic republic, to love your neighbor, and that means not to completely withdraw and disengage. So that's going to be the real question, is can the next generation find a way to engage as Christians, as people of faith, in the public sphere without making the same mistakes that the previous generation did?
Do you have a take on this with respect to the disengagement? Because you're saying a little bit of the, opposite.
Yeah, and some of this is leadership. So I had started pastoring a church. I was a youth pastor for 8 years, and I pastored a church for 10 years. And when I started pastoring, I was 31 years old. And so all my leaders were in their 30s, and we began to draw people in their 20s in the life of a congregation. So some of this actually just has to do with structure, leadership, and engagement. And people are drawn to folks like them, and they step back from places where they can't demonstrate agency. So I think there's just a kind of sociological element to that. But the other is leadership is about who gets listened to. So we're engaging in a project right now. We're in the first year of a project where we are working with faith leaders because for 30 years, religious organizing has been a part of CDF's work.
Yeah.
I found her not just by her own faith, but she understood how Christianity, specifically faith broadly, helps to create a moral calculus and moral suasion for children in public policy. So we're working with a group of congregations who are willing to see young adults as experts on their own lives, to help them to craft and curate theologies of child well-being, but also have pastors listen to young adults about what their needs are to reshape congregational life to meet those needs. I think
the asset-based framework again. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's what we've learned about public policy. It's what Sister Simone is talking about lived experience. Tell me about your life. If you listen to young people talk about their lives, you orient your ministry to them, then they will be more responsive to you. Same thing with public policy, same thing with politics. Listen to what they're actually telling you about their needs, their challenges, their hopes, and then shape a public policy agenda, shape a congregational identity, shape a ministry project around that.
Yeah.
So we've got folks who are actually doing that, and they're seeing results, so we're excited to continue to support them in it.
Sister Simone, is it easier to be a liberal in Catholic spaces or a Catholic in liberal spaces?
Is it easier to be a liberal?
Which is harder is the question.
To be a liberal in Catholic spaces or to be a Catholic in liberal spaces? Oh, when I first went to DC in 2004, it was way harder to be a Catholic in liberal spaces. You're what? Nowadays, we got some credibility and some acceptance. And when I first went, it was quietly said by members of Congress, I'm Catholic. But then that changed over time. I think the key really is to be consistent and to be faithful. And that being faithful means that open to the opportunities of the time to live our values. And what you're saying about getting the people to express their views and be listened to, and then listen to other people's expressions is critically important. And one of the benefits is I don't lead a church. I'm not ordained. But in my beloved institution of the Catholic Church, I sort of can get in trouble sometimes because people get jealous that people are listening to me and maybe not to them. And so the hard part has been, I think, finding that or letting the Spirit break through in a variety of ways and being respectful of it. The first time we did Nuns on the Bus, and if you don't know Nuns on the Bus, Google it. We actually have a music video up. But anyway.
We should have played that tonight.
Oh, we should have played it.
Yeah, I didn't think of it.
But anyway, it's called It's All About That Bus, based on It's All About That Bass. Remember that song? Anyway, so, but the thing about the bus was it invited everybody in. No one was turned away. All were welcomed. And the hunger to be welcomed both by Catholics and non-Catholics into a space where you can share values. And then at the end, after the second bus trip, somebody recommended it to me. We started this thing where you could sign the bus, where if you committed to whatever it was, working for immigration reform or tax reform or voter turnout, then if you committed, you signed the card, then you signed the bus. because it was no longer just nuns on the bus. It was everybody on the bus. And then for the places where we didn't go, we had people send in these clear stickies that they had signed, and we put them on the bus so that it was a universal thing.
Yeah.
And so I think my faith commitment dimension really is both Catholic and outside, that it's really about being on the edge and welcoming in, which is so freeing. I am so grateful I'm not in the
Just to the
structure.
audience, get your questions ready. In a few minutes, we will begin opening it up to Q&A of the audience. Dr. Moore, what is the work? Like, what is the work? What have you been doing? You know, what is the work that you are doing that you're trying to change this really toxic narrative around, you know, what evangelicism means in this country from within? And so what's the role that we all can play also?
Well, there are a number of things. One of the things that we've been working on that I'm really excited about, two friends of mine and I, David French, who's a columnist at the New York Times, and Curtis Chang, who's an evangelical leader in California, and we have done a curriculum called The After Party, previously called the Post-Partisan Church, but the After Party sounds
It's cooler.
better.
It's way cooler.
And what this is to enable evangelical Christians to think through not the what of politics in terms of these candidates or these issues, but the how. Because one of the things that we have seen over the past several years is that there is increasingly an attitude that one's character, moral convictions, and in a Christian context, one's discipleship and following of Jesus can be put aside when it comes to political engagement. Right. And so when I started hearing from pastors who would say that when they parenthetically mentioned a statement like, turn the other cheek, love your enemies, and people would come up after the service and say, where did you get those liberal talking points? And the pastor would then say, I'm quoting Jesus Christ. What surprised me was the fact that what usually would be said then is, well, that doesn't work anymore.
Wow.
Really?
And so that is a crisis that we believe needs to be addressed, and also to address the ways that there are different kinds of ways that people are responding to this political moment. Some people are responding with exhaustion. I just don't want to think about it anymore. Some people are responding with combativeness and quarrelsomeness. And some people are responding with cynicism, which is to say, this is just the way people are, this is the way politics is, and this is the way it'll always be. There's nothing we can do about it. We're trying to address that.
Can you get it online yet?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Oh, look.
Just Google the After Party.
The After Party, good branding.
I'll remember that too.
I wanted to, so you were kind of talking about cynicism, and I think it's really easy to kind of fall into cynicism when things seem like they're broken or dysfunctional. And I'm wondering for each of you, and this will be my last question before we go to Q&A, like, how has your faith evolved over time, and how has it sustained you through these kind of very difficult periods, particularly recently? You're laughing. Go ahead.
No, I remember applying to seminary. So I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and deeply Christian, very conservative place. And so I remember applying to seminary, quoting theologians from Dallas Theological Seminary, post-tribulation dispensationalists, deeply conservative folks. And so it's been a long journey from conserving roots and what the good Senator Raphael Warnock wrote about as the divided mind of the Black church, kind of a conservatism related to personal piety, but a progressivism as it relates to public policy. And so I've kind of gone that full journey where I couldn't have seen, I can look back at sermons that I preached years ago that castigated folks who were different from me, who lived differently, loved differently, understood their bodies differently. And so I think mostly the serious commitment of engagement with people in real life as a pastor, the engagement and the struggle in the streets with young people who have radicalized me, and the attempts to put that to real work in the face of everyone being made in the image and likeness of God is what's really kind of changed my trajectory of how I understand what I preach, how I proclaim it before I open my mouth in the work every day. Frankly, I thank God for time, energy, and other folk who have changed my heart and my mind and helped me to see the scriptures, the spirit, and the struggles in different ways.
Amen.
Will each of you answer that quickly, and then we'll hear what our audience
quickly.
has for you?
Okay, amen to that. I will add a piece from retreat in 2011 when I was having a really hard time being a lobbyist in Capitol Hill. And the retreat director pushed me I hate spiritual direction when they actually direct, you know. So that pushed me to radical acceptance. So after about 3 days, 4 days, I got to radical acceptance, even of the ones I found most difficult, which was Mitch McConnell. But once I radically accepted Mitch McConnell, then it was
What does that mean? What does that mean?
Radical acceptance,
for those of us who are not.
to care about the person themselves, to care for the individual, break through what you were talking about the polarized messaging, to care for that person and to see him as a person. So I got to that point where my heart was open. It was really great. I loved it. And I had 4 more days of retreat, and I thought I could be holy for 4 days. And then my retreat director said to me, all right, now add in fighting. Fighting? What do you mean fighting? And he said, well, isn't that what you do in DC? I was like, oh yeah, I guess so. But it was the biggest gift of my life, because what happened is that I came to realize that too often when we fight, we push back against something. And when you push back against something, you get stuck. And when you look at what Jesus did, was rather than pushing back against, because if you stop pushing back, they're going to go ahead, but rather stand side by side, shoulder to shoulder, and look at whatever the issue is, the concern is, and try to articulate it together with reverence and compassion, with radical acceptance and fighting for a vision. It has dramatically changed. And so for me, what happened is that it became like the burning bush. If you know the reference in the Hebrew scriptures, that as long as we're faithful, we won't be destroyed.
Thank you. Take us home before our Q&A.
I think one of the things that's changed for me is that I have much more of a focus now on helping the next generation to have the right kind of disillusionment. I'm finding many younger evangelicals especially who have seen Christianity used as a means to an end and are rightly disillusioned by that. But then to step in and say, this isn't something that is new. As a matter of fact, the one who told us this would happen is Jesus. So be disillusioned in the sense of losing your illusions, but don't become cynical. And that's a major part of what is happening in my life right now. And also the fact that, I think that in the Trump era, we have thought about all of the alliances and coalitions and friendships that have broken apart, and that's painful. What we sometimes forget, though, are all of these new coalitions and new alliances of people who never thought they would be in a room together. That's I think one of the things.
A reaction has a reaction. Okay, we can go. Where are the mics?
Entree name.
They're back there. All right. So, who has questions? Please. Well, you can go to the mics.
Well, where
And
is
we'll
the
take
mic?
student questions first, and please make your question a question. All of those things.
Hi there, my name is Ella. I'm a first year at the college. And I'm just curious, regarding representatives in government, including Supreme Court justices, in your opinion, to what extent is it justifiable to allow faith or religion guide your interpretation of the Constitution and law?
Not everybody has answers. If there's just one person that would like to respond to that.
Well, in my view, we operate in a pluralistic society under a constitution, which means we don't impose our religious beliefs upon other people. That does not mean, though, that one is not motivated by religious beliefs in terms of what that person cares about. So, for instance, someone may become involved in school lunch issues in their community precisely because they care about vulnerable children, because of what their religious beliefs teach. That's not a violation of what we have in a constitutional republic, but we don't coerce consciences.
Yeah, I'll quickly say, I think those categories actually matter. I think legislation is to be representative, the bodies are to be representative. So in as much as you understand the folks who sent you there, you represent their perspectives, you bring your own because you are of them, that's one thing. The judicial branch, when you start talking about interpreting laws, I think you have a responsibility to a different kind of scripture. So the actual laws, the Constitution, the Declaration of, like this is your writ for interpretation. And so I think this is where you have a higher responsibility to check your own perspective before you come to that interpretation.
Thank you. Next question.
Howdy, everyone. My name's A.T. Craig. I'm a master's candidate at the public policy school here. Last quarter at the IOP, one of the Pritzker Fellows was Chase Strangio, a transgender rights lawyer, who described pretty unambiguously an all-out war against transgender individuals, in particular transgender youth. And I'm left curious, what about transgender people leaves the conservative Christian voter base in the United States feeling so catastrophic and apocalyptic? What threat do transgender people pose?
Well, I think for many people, it's not so much the threat that transgender people pose as much as it is the question of whether or not categories of male and female that would have been uncontroversial just a few years ago today are in such a state of flux. And so there are many people who are saying, are we moving toward a place where simply saying there are men and women as creational biological categories, is that bigotry in the United States of America? That's where a lot of the pushback is coming from.
Interesting.
We can go to the next question.
Hello, my name is Navya Kupasetti, and I'm a Harris student, so Masters of Public Policy. So my question is, like, in my religion, we have, like, a lot of female gods, but then, like, the men out here are, like, raping women. So, you know, why are, like, laws being, like, pushed slowly? And, you know, and this might kind of like tie into my second question maybe, but it's like I went to a state university and there would be a lot of people, you know, like saying they're Christian and are saying like abortion is bad and all. So, and you talk about like imposing that, right? So what do you think about those kind of people who come on campuses and say like what you're doing is wrong and maybe you should go convert into like Christianity because when you go to heaven, you go to hell. I've seen a lot of those big posters like roaming around on campus when I went to University of Cincinnati.
Yikes. I'm really sorry for your experience. That's really hard to hear. My beloved church has a tendency to do that sometimes. Around the abortion issue, much of the leadership is very adamant. But I think that that has changed a bit with Pope Francis, but the rest of the leadership hasn't gotten the message. Pope Francis has said, yes, care for the unborn is important, but equally sacred is care for the born, care for the marginalized, care for the earth, care for those who are left out. He's got this whole litany of things that are equally sacred. And I think sometimes proportionality gets lost in some of that politics you've been talking about, Dr. Moore, that we can lose perspective in fear and response. But for me, the key is, out of a Christian tradition, is love. And that doesn't sound very loving and doesn't sound, sounds like it's coming from a place of fear for the person promoting it. And I feel, I'm sorry for that. And I'm sorry for your experience.
One of the things that I would say in terms of imposing one's religion, you might not agree with someone's position on abortion, but it is necessary to understand what it is that person is saying and not saying. For pro-life Americans, and I'm one of them, we're not talking about two people. We're not talking about one person when we're talking about an unwanted pregnancy, but two. And so the question is, how do we resolve that in a way that cares for both of them? Again, you might disagree about the personhood of the unborn child, but when we simply say, well, all pro-life Americans want to control women or to impose their religion, just use in your mind a way of putting migrant children into the category there and say, how would I respond to the question, your caring for migrant children on the border is an imposition of your religion? No, your religion may teach you to value those people, but they're people. And so that's where the fundamental argument is.
But I think one of the problems is with this blanket ban that people are attempting is that it doesn't understand the anguish and reality of what families deal with. And for me, this issue changed dramatically when I was doing family law and I got appointed by the court to represent a 13-year-old who had been raped by her uncle and was pregnant. That forever changed my approach because of the anguish of this 13-year-old child. And for me, I think it's much more complicated than we can legislate. And it's more about power and control than it is about Christian care for everyone who's left out.
Also,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to thank you for the context around your question, because I think it has implications for another kind of politics beyond the issue of abortion and reproductive justice. That is that if God is a man, then man gets to be God. And I say that to suggest that the kinds of oppressions that you talk about that constrain women's bodies come from a conjecture of a God who is male, and leadership that then begins to reflect that and has the power and authority to then constrain what women do with their bodies. And so I want to make this tie between Christianity and politics not just about American electoral kind of public policy, because there are things that we are wrestling with because our lack of creativity, God is creator, we are to be creative, our lack of creativity or sophistication with how we even read scriptures. So we do things like take the constraints of how we understand an entity, we make it a male, godly, older figure. We disregard a full life of Jesus even, who showed up as a baby and as a toddler and as a 12-year-old. And because the same thing about gender is also about age. If Jesus only existed when he was 30 to 33, if this is the only part that mattered, then actually this part where he was a child doesn't matter, which means children don't matter. So I just want to thank the context of your question, because I think there are implications for how we do our religious work that show up in our politics, and abortion rights and reproductive justice is only one place where this is showing up to constrain people because they're marginalized religiously.
I just want to point out that the thunder comes when we're talking about this.
Thank you.
Can we go to the next question?
Yeah. Hello, my name is Anand. I'm a first-year MPP student. I have a question that we see a rise of global conservative wave throughout the world, and they use idea of religion back to the roots of the religion, use the same symbols, same myths, same narrative of the religion, and they put it as this is the original thing, so you have to go back to the original roots. And when the progressives, political, cultural progressives try to hone the same gospel to the people, saying that it is not the case, there is a progressive side to it too, people say that no, the original thing, the original pure thing is the thing. So how we can do as a policymaker, as a thought leader, as a spiritual leaders, how we can create a narrative challenge, myths and symbolic challenge to this whole idea of let's go back to the roots, and that's the pure thought of idea of our religion. How to stop that and how to create a strong response to this politicization and cultural conservatism. Thank you.
I mean, to me, this is like who gets to interpret religion and and gets that credibility. And a literalist reading is what you're saying many people do. So does anyone want to respond to that?
I want to respond, but I'm puzzled. Because I find roots liberating and interesting, and within the Catholic tradition, we have a ton of root literature.
I think it's a literalist reading. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but it's when it's a very literal reading of the roots of a religion. Is that what you're saying?
It's a particular way to show the same gospel, and it could, in different religions, we have particular narratives of a life of a Jesus or life of a prophet, and you can use that same thing to spread hate and violent narrative building. And we try to convince people. People say, no, that is the original thing. What are you talking about? That's your personal experience that you're trying to dilute the whole idea.
Yeah, what's interesting is
fundamentalism.
Yeah, the challenge is, number one, we're usually not actually talking about the root. We're talking about where we have kind of originated. There's an etymological connection between roots and radicalism. So if actually we went back to the place where we were kind of talking about more of the origins of Christianity here specifically, not talking about Western interpretations thereof, not talking about actually the roots of a post-Constantine church. Like there are different roots. So I get where you're going, and I want to say there are deeper roots than what we usually stop at. And if we went there, we would get to something more radical. So I don't want to say don't go back to the roots. I want to say keep pushing. I also want to say what I said before. As we become, I believe, in a Pauline context, that scripture is best read in community. These letters were to communities. And so we've got to do it as our communities become more diverse and expansive. We should be reading things and interpreting things in a more diverse and expansive way. And I'm going to take that as affirmation that happened in the church.
Amen.
Not
Amen.
condemnation.
Next question, please.
Thank you.
My name is John Stewart. Pleasure to meet you. So you mentioned deeply theological realities, of particularly regarding materialistic, anti-cosmic philosophies, frankly, so getting back to basics. A few talking points about human relations and human ecology, generativity, interdependence, and oneness of the universe, cosmic consciousness.
Sir, what's the question?
So, as we gaze into the constellation of opinions, universities are the churches of the new frontier JFK talked about. I want to talk about new takes on radical feminism being a good thing, mainline, open, warm, and affirming humanism, mental health, psychobiology, biopolitics, the race question, ecofeminism.
Is there a question in there?
The theologizing of the social environment. So I have a question. How do we rediscover the sacred here in our communities? Talking about radical restructuring of a society that we've never seen before. So universities can be challenging. So how do we do that? How do we level forces of good and evil, ecumenical, ethical culture,
all right,
and the engagement of humanism's potential?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Wilson.
Yeah. First, I think we affirm the Imago Dei, right? We see the sacred in the created beings that we share the earth with. And so I think in as much as we spend time getting to know lived experience, spend time in reflection and conversation, do that expansively, we actually are getting closer to the sacred. Clearly, the sacred is more than my individual self or expressions. And so I come closer the more I come into connection with others. I also do that as I come closer, as I spend more time in contemplation and reflection, so that I might be sensitized to the reality of God and the transcendent in others. So I think connection and contemplation are tools that we use to get to the sacred.
And I would just add that that is a communal process.
Yes.
Just kind of putting an underline and emphasis on what you were saying is that we need to find it together, and that's the benefit of a university, is you find all kinds of people that raise good questions and help and push us in that reflective space to new places.
Next question.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I am Reverend Monica Faith Stewart, so the Reverend part of me has felt wonderful this evening. I am also a former politician, and I face the horrors, really, of the threat to this democracy. And so this evening, it's been really comforting for the Reverend But for the politician, it still leaves me with, how do you talk to the evangelicals? We glossed over that about the evangelical role in Trump's winning in Iowa. And I'm not talking about the leaders, I'm talking about the rank and file. And how do we bring that kind of interest of human exchange when the very fabric of the government is at risk here? Maybe some of you don't. What's
the question, though?
My question is, how do we take what's been expressed this evening, and how does that make a difference for November and the elections?
I think we did talk about that, but does anybody want to restate or reframe?
I'll just say that I think the challenge is when we see the divisions and that the dividing lines and we don't cross them. And that, from my perspectives, it's holy curiosity will get us out of this. If we are holy, H-O-L-Y, and maybe W-H-O-L-Y, I don't know. But if we have holy curiosity about the other, and I'm willing to bridge the gap and understand how you got to where you are, then I think we begin to make change. When we just say it's their problem, then it distances me both from the problem and from a capacity to make a change. And so how do we exercise curiosity and engage others in the process? That's the only way, I think, communally, we're going to heal this mess.
Anything to add, or we have one more question? Good. Last question.
Hi, I'm Alan. I'm a fourth-year history major in the college. Previously, you have asked about how religious groups and lobbyists inflect their opinions on Constitution. And I would like to ask, how do you see these actors have a well affect the U.S. foreign politics in this diverse world? Not only
sorry, can you say it again? Somebody coughed a in here.
How do you see these religious groups and lobbyists having effect or will influence the U.S. foreign politics in this diverse world? Not only the Israeli-Palestine conflict, but also other parts of the Middle East or Orthodox majority Russia or the atheist majority China. Thank you very much.
What is the role of religious leaders in trying to influence and inform foreign policy, U.S. foreign policy?
I know what I've done, and I'm not sure, I'm not connected to the institutional Catholic Church in doing this, but rather in my role at Network, is we're connected with Catholic sisters around the globe. And so what I would do, especially when we were having problems with Central America, is to reach out to the sisters in Central America and find out what was actually going on the ground, and then hear their story, and then get that story to decision makers.
Policymakers. Dr. Wilson.
I want to respond to both of these questions at the same time. I have a dear friend and homegirl named Dr. Brianna Parker. She leads an outfit called the Black Millennial Cafe. They do research on the Black church and trends within the Black church, and her motto is, "I still believe in the Black church." And I say that to both questions because this is the only space and place that Black people own lock, stock, and barrel and have deeply and completely politicized. And we've done that based upon our theological understanding about what should happen in the world. And so political questions are really about what should happen in the world. We understand the projection and the prophetic decrees about Jesus is that the government will be on his shoulders. And so when we talk about this, we don't make a distinction in this way. So if you want to move, you want to know how Black people are going to move, you got to know how the Black church is going to move. If you want to know how to inform politics, and you look at a Chicago-based network of Black church leaders called the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference that after October 7th began to convene every Sunday mornings and evenings and throughout the week to educate people on Black Christians' commitment, responsibilities, and helping them to discern the realities and the connections and educate them politically and historically about the place that we call Palestine and the place that others call Israel, and the reality of the connections and the delinking that from a Zionist commitment that around what Israel has been, would be, and that is not what's in the Bible. So I say this to say, we use the resources of religion in the context of the containers of congregations to help people to understand how to impact both domestic politics, because this is how you're going to move Black people. It's the only way you've ever politically moved Black people. If you want to organize Black people, you don't have a church strategy, you're not being serious.
Amen.
You want to connect with Black people electorally, you don't have a church strategy, you will fail. And if you want to help them understand global issues, you go to how they have understood ancient issues, and that begins with the text as well. And the church is the most trusted source. And the same with the DeWitt Proctor Conference, as a non-governmental organization with status at the UN, help to educate thousands of Black Christians across the country around this issue. I'm pleased to be affiliated, pleased to be a trustee of that. And this is the way we will continue to frame those issues, is through the life of the trusted church with an ancient frame and contemporary application.
Dr. Moore, I just want to give you a chance for a last word, 20 seconds, we're over time, but.
You might be surprised at some of the coalitions that come together across religious communities. For example, Christians, Jewish Americans, others standing up for Uyghur Muslims in the genocide against them in China. That has been ongoing for several years. No connection in terms of relationship between those communities and Uyghur Muslims, but they understand what it is to be a religious minority targeted for who they are and understand that injustice is wrong. So those coalitions come together. Yeah.
All right, well, we covered a lot of terrain. Thank you all for being here. Please help me in thanking our panelists. Have a good evening.